Okay, hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So if you don't know already, I went on a safari and I traveled around Africa for 3 weeks. So today we're going to talk about Safari Packing Essentials Electronics Edition. These are all the things I think would be great tools to help you capture the memory of being on a safari and capture some great shots to show your friends and family. So let's get into it. Item number one is your cell phone. So for those of you who may not have a professional camera or don't necessarily feel comfortable shooting on manual, worry not, your cell phone camera may just be enough. Technology has evolved that nowadays the cameras on our cell phones are very, very powerful with the zoom capabilities. On the iPhones, the ability to take slow-mo videos, cinematic videos, portrait photos, videos in zoom, photos in zoom, you name it, it's got pretty much every feature you can have. So if you don't have a professional camera, if you don't feel comfortable shooting on manual settings, your cell phone is honestly the best bet. And this is not to say that you should not be shooting on auto with your camera. I just found on my safari that shooting manual was the way to go. A lot of the times the auto settings tend to be overexposed, and so when you actually look at your photo in post, you will see that the clouds or maybe parts of the grass are overexposed, and there's honestly really no way of bringing that all the way down and fixing it. So that's why I'd recommend, for those of you who are not so well versed in shooting with a professional camera, to opt for the iPhone or other cell phone options. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about the camera that I brought with me on this trip. So I decided to take the Sony a7R II. This is primarily a photo camera, but it does wonders still with videos. This was basically the camera that I used on my entire trip to take all the videos that I have and all the photos as well. And all the photos and videos I shot on the Sony a7R II were done in manual mode. Next up, let's talk camera lenses. So I brought a 70 to 300 millimeter lens with me. Personally, if I were to go back on a safari again, I would probably look for something that goes up to 4 to 500 millimeters. Again, this is just because I am comfortable using my camera and switching between settings quickly and making adjustments on the go. And I will say that 80% of the animals I shot were within range and the zoom lens was more than enough. However, that other 20%, there were shots that I wanted to get more details of that I wasn't able to reach just because I had maxed out on the zoom capabilities of the particular lens I had. If you go on a safari specifically to shoot birds, then I highly recommend at least a 500 millimeter lens because those animals are very, very small, very tiny, and they are hidden almost everywhere. Another important feature I think everyone should be looking for on their camera lens, especially if you are into videography, would be some type of optical steady shot. Now, depending on the lens that you buy, depending on the brand, they do have different names for that type of feature. The Sony, it is called the OSS, the optical steady shot. However, with brands like Tamron and Sigma, I believe they have other names for it. But basically, it just means that the lens comes in with some built-in stabilization because the further you zoom, the more shaky your video will actually come out. And so it is absolutely necessary, in my opinion, especially if you're taking videos, to find a lens that has some type of steady shot or built-in stabilization. It makes the videos much smoother, and I definitely noticed that I was able to get those National Geographic panning shots that were smooth and flowy as opposed to something that would be super shaky without the stabilization. Next up on this list, we have extra batteries. Now, of course, if you're shooting all day long and you're an avid photographer, videographer, it is definitely essential to have some backup batteries. I found that if I were to turn my camera off while we were driving and then turn it back on to take photos of animals and shoot videos, that one battery pretty much lasted me an entire day. However, I did have a spare one just in case because you never know what could happen. And on the note of batteries and charging your batteries, be sure to bring an adapter with you. So in Tanzania and Uganda, the adapter is type G, which is the British outlet types. So if you already have that outlet, amazing, awesome. And for those of us who don't, just be sure to get an adapter. For my Apple products, because I like using the fast charging options, you never know when you need your phone and when you need to be on the go. I have purchased the Apple Travel Adapter Kit, which basically lets you switch the adapter type in and out of the same charging port. I find this super easy and super convenient because I will just take one extra piece with me and then switch in and out whenever I need to. For the rest of my electronics, I will just bring one adapter with multiple sockets to plug into. That way I don't have to bring more than one and it saves me the hassle and I can just charge all my electronics in one go. It's also worthwhile to mention that on this trip, I did not actually bring a portable charger with me. A pro tip for all of you is to check with your hotel to make sure that they have outlets available. Depending on the safari style you do, there are bush camps, there are tented camps, there are more luxury stays. So I would just be sure to double check that there are sockets available, and if so, you probably don't need a portable charger, just like me. So next up, on the note of professional photography, an absolute must in my opinion is an ND or UV filter. Now, I brought the UV filter just because sometimes it is a little bit dark in the morning, and so it's not necessarily the best time to put an ND filter on. However, if I were to do it again, I probably would just leave the UV filter at home. An ND filter, in my opinion, though, is absolutely necessary. You are shooting in bright lights, and you never know what reflections are going to come across. Sometimes I found that if there was a mix of shadows and exposed light within the same frame, that the exposure would just be way too high for the highlights, whereas the shadow parts would be way too dark. And so with an ND filter, it will just help balance things out. And especially if you're visiting places like the Ngorongoro crater, where there is overcast throughout the morning and there is fog, I highly, highly recommend bringing an ND filter, just because once you take your photos, if you don't have one, chances are the sky is going to be extremely blown out from the highlights without you even realizing. I also do think an ND/UV filter would be beneficial because it is super, super dusty out there. I think we can all agree that cleaning the dust off of one of these filters is going to be a lot more pleasant than cleaning the dust off of the actual lens that you probably spent thousands of dollars on. Not to mention that with an ND filter, it serves an alternative purpose as well, so it's a 2-in-1. But if you're not a big fan of ND filters, or you don't have one for whatever reason, then I would highly recommend just a UV filter, simply to keep the dust out of your lens. Which brings me to my next item, a camera cleaning kit. I felt like my holy grail was definitely this air pumpy thing. I don't really know what it's called, but basically you just squeeze it, it pumps out air, and it kind of cleans out the dust on the ND filter. I found this amazing to use on the go because honestly, taking out a wipe and a spray bottle may not necessarily be the most efficient thing to do, especially not when you're driving and there's a bunch of safari vehicles passing by and there's just dust coming in and in and in and in the vehicle. It is not the best idea to get something wet and then wipe it down, because I don't think it's going to be super effective. So this little air pump thing actually helped the most, and it was the one thing that I reached for the most when I was looking to clean the filter on my camera lens. Okay, and one very last item on the list for all the pro photographers out there. I know people talk a lot about bringing tripods on a safari, but I actually don't think that that is something that's really useful. I was reading some blogs online, and I do agree after sitting in a safari vehicle that a tripod would not be very user-friendly. A, because you're moving in a vehicle in off-roading terrain, so a tripod doesn't really help keep things stable per se when everything else is moving. And B, the safari vehicle hood actually opens up so that you can stand up. And unless you have a tripod that is pretty tall, I would like to say can extend to over 6 feet, it probably isn't necessarily worth it, because you'd only be able to set it up to shoot outside of one of the Jeep vehicle windows instead of above the roof. And so a good alternative to this, from what I've read online, is you take a sock and you fill it with rice, or you fill it with beans, or something just soft, and then you put that over the edge of the safari vehicle, be that the window or the roof opening, and that way you can plop your camera onto it and have a little bit more stability. Now for me, I did not actually end up using a rice sock. I ended up just putting my camera on the safari vehicle. So either plopped onto the window, just supporting it, or just putting my camera and resting it onto the safari vehicle hood. I will say though, I do think next time I would bring a rice sock, or find a way to fill a sock with rice over there, just because it gives you a little bit more elevation, and that way you won't get pieces of the framing of the Jeep on your videos. Just because it helps create some space between the actual framing of the Jeep and your camera lens and lift it up a little bit. And so that way you won't really catch parts of the Jeep in your shots, because I found that sometimes when I was trying to shoot something that I really needed my camera to sit onto something for support and for stability, that a lot of times it would catch the actual Jeep itself or the framing of the Jeep, which is not what I wanted. And so I do think a rice sock is definitely necessary if you're really, really into photography and videography. And that is it for the Safari Packing Essentials Electronics Edition. I hope you guys like this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you guys next time.